bit about me. My name is Lori Willette. I'm a product consultant with InsightWorks, and I've been with InsightWorks for approximately 5 years. I assist Business Central partners and clients with the implementation and training of Dynamic Ship and the order fulfillment worksheet. And I'm here to help you identify some of the Dynamic Ship configuration challenges and solutions that I've encountered in my years of implementing Dynamic Ship. So some of the gotchas and some of the, obscure settings that we really like you to consider before actually implementing. So what we're going to talk about today are Business Central essentials. So what do you need to install in Business Central? Configuring Dynamic Ship. So some of the settings that are important when you're configuring Dynamic Ship, we're going to kind of touch on those and some of those settings that seem to pose issues when you're implementing. Dynamic Ship customer options. We're going to go over the customer options table. We're going to take kind of a deep dive into that just so that you understand what settings are important and what you need to make sure is populated there. And lastly, we're going to take care of the freight price rules. So we're going to take a look at that table as well and what you need to do to ensure that freight is being marked up correctly. So first thing, we're going to dive into Business Central Essentials. Now I'm going to go over everything on the slide first, and then I'll hop into Business Central and we'll kind of address the topics that are in this portion of the presentation. So we're going to talk about license plate management. Now, license plate management must be installed for Dynamic Ship. The capability is included for Dynamic Ship, so therefore you need it. But a subscription is required if it's going to be used outside of Dynamic Ship. So for example, if you're going to be using license plating with Warehouse Insight, you would require a subscription for that. User permissions and InsightWorks users, we're going to take a look at those. So just like when you're doing an ERP implementation of Business Central, you're going to want to define who your users are and who your administrators are. So we'll take a look at that. Freight integration and carriers, we're going to take a look at the freight integration provider page and some of the settings there, as well as setting up carriers and adding carriers, and the external rate entry and the advantages and setup of that. Okay, so now we're going to take a hop into Business Central here, and we're going to take a look at what we recommend for license plate installation and why it's important. So what I've noticed when I've done implementations, or even when I'm providing support to a customer that has been using Dynamic Ship for any kind of length of time, they may come to me and say, hey, you know what, we're just having issues with posting back orders with warehouse shipments, or we're having issues with not seeing the posted license plates on the license plate list. So if you go here to the Dynamic Ship list, and by the way, this is the role center that I've chosen here. So this role center is the shipping and receiving warehouse management system. This will bring all the Dynamic Ship actions to the main page of your Business Central. Now, when I go to my lists here and I take a look at license plates, this is where you can identify if in fact license plate management has been installed for a customer. Because if you're not seeing any of these posted documents here on the right-hand side, then you're going to see that if they all appear like this and they say they've been posting shipments, then they do not have license plate management installed. So you'll want to make sure that that's done. If this is appearing here, then all should be working nominally. So actually, now we're going to take a look at users. So just as I mentioned, with implementing Business Central, you're going to want to define who your users are and who your administrators are. So the same thing goes for Dynamic Ship. So when you're setting up a user, and I'm just going to choose my own user here. So when you're setting up a user and you want to make sure that they have the correct permission sets, you'll have to make sure you jump into the user here and then add some permission sets for Dynamic Ship. Now, the ones that I recommend that you add are the dship admin, if they're administrators. Okay, so those are the people that will have to be able to handle the setup, be able to handle the customer options table, any of the configurations. Those would be dship administrators. I would also give them the dship user and then iWorks common. So make sure that they have those permission sets applied, so that way then they're going to be able to do what they need to do. If they're just a Dynamic Ship user, then just make sure that they've got the dship user and the iWorks common. Those are the two that are definitely needed for those scenarios. Okay. So once you've done that, then your users will be defined clearly based on the permission sets that you applied for them. So now we're going to take a hop into the freight integration provider page, and we're going to take a look at this. Now, I've got just my 2 freight integration providers here. Now, you can run multiple freight integration providers at one time, which is why we've got the LTL integrators, and typically a lot of our users will have EasyPost as well as any of the LTL providers. But here we've got the EasyPost one set up, and I've got my API key installed here. One other setting that we like to bring to your attention is this address validation countries. So we're going to click into here. Now, you don't have to add the country codes here. If you leave the country code blank and just make sure that the integration provider code listed here is EasyPost, then address validation will happen for all countries that they're shipping to. We don't want to limit it to specific countries, because if there's an anomaly where they're shipping to a country, say, let's say they're shipping to Germany, then they'll want to make sure that that address validation is still happening. So always leaving this blank is a good thing to do. Okay. Now, also what we're going to take a look at while we're here is we're going to make sure that we're going to enable the external rate entry. Now, I have already enabled this, okay? But what you can also do, what you need to do is you just basically highlight your external rate entry here. You make sure that you enable it. And the API key that you needs to go in there is external carrier, all one word, all lowercase. Okay. So I'm just going to copy that. And then I'm just going to paste that here in my API key field. Tab off there, make sure it's saved. And now the external rate entry is enabled along with your EasyPost. Okay. Now we're going to go take a look at the carriers. Now this will address the 2 topics at once here. We're going to take a look at the actual setting up of the EasyPost carriers, but we're also going to take a look at adding the external carriers as well. Now, with the carrier accounts, these carrier account IDs from EasyPost are the account ID that is applied or given from EasyPost when the carrier is set up in the EasyPost platform. It's not the UPS account. It's not the FedEx account. It's the account ID from EasyPost. So encourage your customers to set up their EasyPost account, set their carriers up, and then you would take the account ID from EasyPost and paste it here. Okay. Now, if you're going to add any other carriers that EasyPost supports, so let's say, for example, they use Speedy, right? Then same thing. You would then add Speedy as the carrier. You'd add the shipping agent Speedy, okay? But then you also need to add the service for this carrier too. So just like in FedEx here, for example, if I go to carrier up here in the ribbon and I go to services, there is all of these listed here, all these services. Now, the column that says service here is the important piece. You can name the code anything you want, but the service is what's important, because this is exactly what EasyPost is looking for. So whenever you're setting up a new carrier, ensure that you're checking with EasyPost. Go to the EasyPost platform, get a list of the services that you can actually see how the services are applied, so that you can make sure that you're putting them in correctly. Okay? So whatever carrier that you add, you also need to add the services for them too. Now, for adding an external carrier, so we've enabled the external rate entry, which is our manual entry that allows you to enter in the tracking details manually. Now, external rate entry was what we used quite some time ago before we had the LTL integrator. The external rate entry mimics getting the carrier label. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've set up this one external carrier. So I've created the shipping agent external, and then I've used the account ID of external carrier. But I have also added a service for this too. So I've just called it external. Okay. Now I did create an own logistics one, because quite often you might have customers that say, yeah, but we've got our own trucks and we deliver our own goods. We deliver products to our customers. So you can then create another one called own logistics or Bob's Trucking, whatever you want to call it. And then make sure that you put the account ID of external carrier, but it must be unique. So add a character afterwards, whether it be A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, whatever you want. And in this scenario here, I've added a 1 after the external carrier. Now, when you go up here to the carrier in the services, again, I've added just a service here called next day. So that's how you actually add your carriers and your services. Also ensure that you're linking the correct freight integration provider here too. So with these external carrier ones, I've linked it to the external freight integration provider. Okay. Now I'm just going to show you how the external carrier works in Dynamic Ship so that then you have an idea of what this offers so that then you can communicate this to your customers, especially those customers that may have situations where they have a lot of collect pickups and they want to just be able to enter in the bill of lading number or the pro number from those shipments, or in those scenarios where they're actually delivering product to their customers themselves. Okay, so I'm just going to grab this warehouse shipment here that's completely picked. I'm going to take a look at this. This one's already packed clearly, but I'm going to jump into this license plate here and just make sure I've got some dimensions and weight applied. Now I'm going to treat this like it's a pallet. So I'm going to mimic having an actual LTL shipment here. Okay. I'm going to close this. Then what I need to do is actually use my pack command of get label or click on the get label button. Okay, so because I don't have my scanner here hooked up, I'm just going to go ahead and get the label by clicking on the button. Now, because I've made this shipment so big, it should basically pop up the external carrier for me, which it just did. Okay, now this is the external rate entry that I mentioned, that it's a manual entry. Now, where it says the shipping agent code, you can choose from external or own logistics. Those are the two that I have set up. And then I'm going to set this. And if they charge a fee to their customer for delivering, they can enter that. So if it's a $50 fee, they can enter that. They can enter in the delivery days if they need. And then they can enter in any kind of tracking that they need. So if, let's say, John Snow was delivered, they can add that in here. And this would be then populated back to the sales order for them. Alternatively, if they're actually using a 3PL outside of Business Central where they're getting their rates from their carrier. Let's say the carrier comes back with $671 and they're going to charge their customer for that. And then they want to put their bill of lading number in here or their pro bill number, then they can do so right here. Okay. So you just say okay here. And what that does is it mimics getting the carrier label. So all this detail then gets populated right back to the sales order, just as if they had gotten a carrier label from EasyPost. But this external rate entry is a very good way of being able to track shipments that are not used out of the traditional sense of using a truck. So like those own transportation, or for those scenarios where their customer has booked the shipment themselves and therefore they want to be able to have that tracking detail entered so that then it's there for their records. So you can see here it added the GL account line for the freight in the sales order. And if I go down to shipping and billing, you can see it updated the shipping agent, the service, as well as added the package tracking detail. So utilizing the external rate entry is a benefit for those scenarios. Okay. Now we're going to hop back to our presentation here and we're going to take a look at the next topic of discussion here. So we're going to configure Dynamic Ship. So when you're configuring Dynamic Ship, we're going to take a look at the Dynamic Ship setup page and we're going to look at the weights and dimensions of the Dynamic Ship setup page. We're also going to look at labeling and posting. And back to the weights and dimensions, I'm not sure a lot of you knew that Dynamic Ship can calculate package weight, and there's a setting there that we're going to show you how to do that. Labeling and posting, Dynamic Ship can actually post a sales invoice, not just the shipment. So we're going to go over that as well. The freight, can the freight be added to a sales order? As you just saw in the demonstration I did of the external rate entry, yes, Dynamic Ship can add the freight line to the sales order for your customer. Address management, how important is address validation? I think this is a topic we're going to talk about just because it is quite important for address validation to happen before it actually gets to the shippers. Because once it gets to the shippers, at that point, it's a little too late because then the order is already there. They're waiting to ship it, box it, get it out the door. So having that address validation prior to getting to the shippers is something we're going to discuss in the setup as well. Customs, what's needed to ship internationally. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to also look at email tracking and how to set up email. Okay. So now we're going to hop right back into Business Central here, and we're going to take a look at the dynamic ship setup page so that you can actually see what we need to do. Now, in the dynamic ship setup page here, we're going to just hop into that. Now, we've separated our fast tabs so they're a little more intuitive now, so you can find a lot of these settings a little easier. But we're going to dive into the weights and dimensions here, and we're going to look at this calculate package weight. Okay. If you have in your item cards, and this is important, especially when you're implementing Business Central, if you know your client is going to be using dynamic ship, then this is a setting that you may want to consider in their item cards when you're actually populating their data or uploading their data. If they want to use dynamic ship and they want dynamic ship to actually calculate package weight or give them a really close estimate as to what the package could weigh, then you'll need to make sure that this is set up in their item cards. Either the item unit of measure, so you want to make sure that the item unit of measure table is populated with everything, including dimensions and weight, or in the item card itself, there is the item gross and the item net weight, and that's in the inventory fast tab of the item card. You want to make sure that those are populated. I have the item gross weight populated in my item card, so I'm going to make sure that I've got item gross chosen. Now you can calculate package weight for just the freight quote if they only going to be using this for freight quoting, just for the package worksheet, or for both. I recommend you set it for both because it's a value in both scenarios. Okay. Always make sure you set your item unit of measure code here. And we also have scale integration. So you can do the calculation, which gives them a rough estimate, which is handy for freight quoting in the sales order, but also in the package worksheet, because then it'll show them when they're done packing a package or a license plate, what that weight calculated to be. And then they could throw the box on the scale and see how close it is. They can also then use the get weight pack command if they have a scale plugged in. Now, if they're just going to use a basic USB plug-in scale, you can just come here and enable it, and then it should be fully functional for them to be able to use the get weight pack command. Okay. Now we're going to take a look at labeling and posting. And this is where, like I said, where you can define whether or not dynamic ship will actually post just the shipment or if it will post the sales invoice at the same time. Okay. Now, I have it currently set to just ship and print. So what that means is it's going to post the shipment and then it's going to print off the posted sales shipment report for me that I can throw in the box when I seal it. Now you can have it set to actually ship, print, and invoice. So then it posts the shipment, prints off the document, and then posts the sales invoice at the same time. Or you can have it set to print both. Now, keep in mind that if you're going to have it set to ship, print, and invoice print, then you need to have some kind of interface in play that will allow you to define printers so these reports will print out automatically. The limitation of the browser, of course, stops you from showing two different PDFs at the same time. So having some kind of interface to actually print these documents will be of value. But it's important to note that dynamic ship can post the invoice at the same time. Now, this is also a setting that can be set on a customer by customer basis, and we'll discuss that when we get to the customer options. Okay. Now we're going to move right on into freight. So here in the freight setup, this is an important setup as well, where you define the domestic country code. I know this says ship to country region code, but having this country code set will differentiate between an international and a domestic shipment for your customers. Also, the freight billing behavior is the standard default is set to update, which is what we always recommend, and that's why it's defaulted to that. If you set this to create new, then it's going to create a new freight line every single time, and we don't want to do that. The freight billing types. Now, you have a choice of using a resource or a GL account. You can choose either one. Either one works just fine. I currently have mine set to use a GL, and then I've also chosen the GL account of delivery fees. Now, this update the freight line description of adding 5 tracking characters. We did this for the purpose of reconciliations. What will happen is the description of the resource or the GL account that you're using. So for example, mine says delivery expenses. It will add the last 5 tracking characters of the tracking number to delivery expenses. Now, if if the accounting teams wanted to run a ledger entries report to see what was posted to that GL account, then they can actually use that to reconcile their invoices. They can export that to Excel, filter out the other charges that or other GL expenses that may have been applied to that GL account, and then filter solely on those ones that have those 5 characters. They can then compare them with the carrier invoices to find the charges and make sure that they all marry up correctly. Skipping freight on alternate payment is set to yes. And the reason for that is because we want to make sure that if you're going to apply a third-party account detail for shipping on an alternate account, that Dynamic Ship does not add another freight line to that. So we want to make sure that that is always set to yes. Okay. Posting the freight line with warehouse shipments, if you're using warehouse shipments, set this to yes. It just makes the most sense. Okay. We want to make sure that that's what's happening here. And we've also got our freight auto selection. Now you can set it to whichever you like here. There's none, single, and cheapest. Typically, we like it set to single because 90% of the time your customer is going to set the shipping agent and the shipping agent service in the sales order, and they're going to just want that label. Okay, but that means also if there is no shipping agent defined in the sales order, Dynamic Ship will still rate shop for them. But if you set it to none, then no matter what, it's going to rate shop. Okay. Now you can use cheapest, and cheapest is great, especially for those scenarios where they may define the shipping agent, but then they want the cheapest service chosen that shipping agent actually offers. Or they may want the cheapest chosen across all carriers that they have set up in EasyPost. That's pretty much what these settings recommend, or what these settings reflect. Okay. Now we're going to hop down and we're going to take a look at customs. This is where you can have Dynamic Ship add customs information automatically for you. Now, this setting here of setting it to yes, if you want Dynamic Ship to populate this detail for you automatically, then please ensure that the item cards have the following populated. They must have their weights defined, their value, the country of origin, and the tariff code. So long as those 4 fields are populated, then Dynamic Ship can populate all that detail automatically, and the customs information will be sent electronically automatically. They won't have to certify. But if they don't have that populated, then they'll have to go into their customs card and they will have to certify their information by making sure that detail's there. In the header of the customs card, there's a description field. Okay. Now you can set this description ahead of time. It saves the shippers a lot of time, especially if you have all that detail in those item cards. You can then have this default content explanation for the description in the header, so they don't actually have to go in and populate that. So for example, I have a customer that ships gloves. They may have their content explanation, like their overall content explanation as gloves, but the detail in the lines below describe what kind of gloves are actually going. Default with Business Central with Dynamic Ship is the customs line value source is set to order line amount. That's so that if your customer offers discounts to their clientele and they don't want to pay the duties and taxes on the full value, they'd rather pay it on the discounted value. Having this set to order line amount ensures that that's what happens. Okay. Generating customs information is set to international, as well as when the commercial invoice is printed. So these are the settings and of how you can actually get Dynamic Ship to populate this detail automatically for you. Now we're going to open up the email tracking. But before we dive too deep in here, what I want to bring to your attention is the email accounts in Business Central itself. Okay. You must have your email accounts defined in Business Central in order to trigger the Dynamic Ship emailing. So you must set this up first. You must set it up, test it, make sure it's functioning correctly. Then you can come in here to Dynamic Ship and you can set your trigger based on label creation or after posting. Label creation means after getting the carrier label. Okay. Now we do have a sample template here for you, and we're going to take a quick look at that. We'll just go in and edit this guy here. Now, this is where you can set the sender email. All right. You can make sure that you populate with the sender email that you would have set up in your Business Central email accounts. So if you've got like a default shipping email that you want put in here, populate it here, then you can also define here, let's say they don't want that. They want their users to be defined as they ship. Then you can turn this on too. Okay. But I highly recommend that if you're going to be leveraging the Business Central emailing, you'll still have to set that up regardless of whether or not they're using their own user details. Those users would also need to be set up in the Business Central email accounts. But this is where you would populate the email that you set up. Now, the email subject clearly states in this example, your order has shipped and it's got a percent number sign. Then down here in the body of the text, it has a lot of different percent number signs, but it's basically telling, hello, customer, your order is shipped with this carrier, and here's the tracking detail and how you can track it and from us. Now, you can use this as a guide if you want to build your own templates, but please keep in mind they have to be in HTML format. So make sure that you're doing that. But if you need any help with what these percent number signs mean, you can go up here to reports and go to parameter help. And this will give you the detail of what each one of those percent number signs mean and what they're pulling in as far as data. Okay. Now there are a couple of email templates that you can send. Now, if you want to design these or, customize them for your customers, you definitely can do so. Just make sure that you're, updating your report IDs here and test it. Make sure that you test it and make sure the reports are going without any issues. Okay. But this is basically how you get Dynamic Ship to email customers and notify them of shipments. The main thing to remember is that you've got to have your Business Central email accounts set up. Okay. So we've handled some of the gotchas here with the configuration. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at the next slide in our presentation. So now we're going to take a look at the Dynamic Ship customer options. We're going to look at customer specific setup. So if they're using an alternate payment, so we're going to look at package option templates and how to set those up. We're going to also look at the setting, which is called use as default for, and how to define it per customer and carrier, and the importance of it. We're also going to look at the order post behavior. So you can define whether a shipment is strictly just the shipment is posted per customer, or if the shipment and the invoice are posted per customer. And the contact override source, where you can actually update some of that based on specific preferences of your customer. So now we're going to hop right back into Business Central here. And I'm going to take us out of the setup page, and we're going to go now into the advanced setup, and let's go take a look at the customer options table. Now, the customer options table, this is a dynamic ship table. This is what dynamic ship looks to first when it's actually populating the sales order in the package worksheet. Dynamic ship looks here first for any kind of anomalies on a customer by customer basis. So if this customer, a Datum Corporation, for example, we have what's set up in here. I have my shipping agent code set to UPS. And if I scroll over here to the right a little bit, I can see that I have a package option template code here that has the same customer number as my customer here. So obviously this package option template refers to this customer. Now I'm going to hop into that package option template here just by, let's show the details of it. I want to see what it looks like. Okay. In this package option template, I have third-party detail here. Now, there are 5 payment types here, and we have a knowledge base article that actually discusses this in depth of what each payment type means. Suffice it to say, 99% of the time, it is always going to be third party. If they have their account number, it's always third party. Okay. So make sure you enter the account number, the zip code, the state or province, the country code as well. And the zip code could be the zip code or postal code in Canada. You need to have this detail. The carriers are actually validating this now. Okay. Now I'm going to pop out of here. Now I can see I've got all this set up for this customer, but look at this use as default for setting. This is where you define how this setup is used. Now, because I have this customer chosen and this carrier chosen, I'm going to make sure that my use as default is for when this customer is used and this carrier is defined. So that then I know any sales orders that are populated with this detail are going to use this package option template. Now, you can set the carrier default in the customer card in Business Central so that you can make sure that all sales orders that are populated for this customer are using UPS. That way, then, too, if they want to ship to this customer using a different carrier, for example, like maybe they have to ship something out to them FedEx that they want to ship on their own account instead of their customer's account, then this customer option would not come into play because the carrier would be different. Okay. We're also going to take a look at the second line here. So let's take a look at tray research. Now I have tray research set up here with a ship to code, but I also have the carrier here. But I don't have my use as default for set. And yet when I scroll all the way to the right, I also have a package option template. Now, the reason the use as default is set to no is because this is like a one-to-one relationship between this package option template and that ship to code. This is getting very granular and very specific. So if you've got this customer chosen with this ship to code and this carrier chosen, this package option template will come into play. Okay. Now I have also updated my customer contact override for these two customers to use the sell to customer instead of the default behavior, which is set up in dynamic ship, because my customer requested that the contact be the sell to customer. Now, we do have a knowledge base article about this contact, the customer contact override, that is really, really important for making sure that you're going to use the correct contact there. And that knowledge base article is very in depth, and I will give that to you at the end of this presentation. It's in the extra slide with this. Now, also, I've got another couple of ones set up here. So for the School of Fine Art, I have this set for customer because I have a blind shipment option template applied here. So for this customer, it's going to use this blind shipment option. Okay. And the use as default would be for customer because it's not effective for a carrier. Unless you want to get specific for just a carrier, then you can do that as well. Now, for the last one, for the second last one here for this customer, I've set the ship and invoice here for the order post behavior. This is what I was discussing when we went over the dynamic ship setup page of how you can define whether or not a specific customer wants the posting of the shipment and the invoice. This is where you would set it. So the same settings that were in dynamic ship setup are here as well. Okay. And then the last customer here, I have set up the manual email entry for this customer. And I'm making sure that for this customer, this dynamic ship customer option will be applied. So when they're emailed the tracking information, it's going to use this manual email entry. Now, using this manual email entry field will also allow you to add multiple emails here. So if you need to notify multiple emails, you can just separate them by a semicolon or a comma. Okay. Now, there is one more setting that I want to discuss that I kind of missed when I did the dynamic ship setup, and it has to do with this customer contact override, and that's with the address validation. So I'm just going to take us back here really quickly. I'm going to go to dynamic ship setup, and I'm just going to jump into address management here really quickly. Address validation is very important. Now, we have it currently set as a default when we load dynamic ship to validate all new addresses, to prompt and to accept and show. I usually recommend that you turn it on for the validation of the sales order and sales quote release so that when the order is released, it's going to run address validations on the actual address that it's shipping to. That way, then it's going to eliminate any kind of errors that you may run into at the time of shipping. The shippers won't have to worry because all of this has been done for them. Okay. Now you can choose any one of these, and you're more than welcome to hover over the tooltips. It does give you good descriptions of what these validations do. Just keep in mind that every validation is a call to easy post. So if you're making all these calls and you're not actually getting any carrier labels, it may turn into charges for you. So just choose the ones that you feel are going to be the most beneficial for the customer. Now, this customer contact override, this is where you can set the overall default. Now, I typically recommend the order document, all three of these as your override fields and to allow the override. Now, if you want to know what these settings do and have in-depth knowledge of how it works, as I said, I have a knowledge base article that will be available to you after the presentation so that then you can actually dive in and take a look. Okay, let's just pop on over to our presentation again. We've covered all that we needed to with dynamic ship customer options, but now what we're going to do is we're going to hop into the freight price rules. Freight price rules are what we use to actually mark up the freight charges for the shipment. So if your customer is going to be having dynamic ship actually charge their customer or add that freight line to the customer, add the freight line to the sales invoice, pardon me, or the sales order, then these freight price rules will come in handy. Now, we're going to go over the sales types, and there are four, pardon me, and they are listed in this hierarchy, and that's how they're applied, and we'll look at that in the table. The standard all customer rules, so there must be one standard freight price rule for all customers, and that is required. Campaigns for freight scenarios, so free freight or any other kind of campaign that they may want to use. So now we're going to jump right back into Business Central again and take a look at this table. So if I go to setup again and we're going to go to advanced, but now we're going to take a look at freight price rules. I'm just going to get rid of this little pane here. Now, as you can see, I've got a few freight price rules here already set up in advance of this. So for my customer, a Datum Corporation, I have it set up here where they have for their customer, for a Datum Corporation orders, if they have a minimum order of $500, then they're not going to have freight added. They're going to get free freight. But all their orders must meet that minimum requirement, so that $500. Okay? Now, the customer price group that I have here is I have a customer price group here, pardon me. Now, this customer price group, if you're leveraging that within Business Central, and they may already have one for sales or they may have one for whatever that they want to offer different freight price rules for, they can set them up here. Okay. Now this customer price group for this one, I've added a 25% markup to the overall freight charge. The other setting I flipped on here is the rate handling to add the markup percentage so that then they get anybody with the customer price group of sales will have a 25% markup on the freight charge. Now, I also have my all customers freight price rule here. This all customers freight price rule is a 35% markup. So for all customers, I'm marking up my freight 35%. With the exception of the Datum Corporation, anything that's over $500, they're not going to get charged freight at all. But anything below $500, they're going to have this 35% markup on their freight. Okay? So there is my standard freight price rule for all customers, and it must be there because Dynamic Ship looks for this first to make sure that it's there to trigger all of the other rules. Now, this campaign is where you can create different scenarios that you may want to use. And for this example, I've created this one for free freight. Now, I've just called the campaign free freight. And in the sales order, there's a campaign field that you can apply free freight to so that then it will not charge the customer freight. Now, you can set this to just don't add freight. Okay, you can set this to don't add freight. But you can also add 100% discount and then add actual freight charge so it shows the customer what they saved on this freight charge. So what it'll do is it'll show the 35% marked up freight charge, but it'll show it as 100% discounted because you don't want to have that freight charged so to the customer, but it will show them what they saved. Okay, so this is the freight price rule table. But as I said, this is the hierarchy in which it'll look for everything. So it's going to look for the customer first, customer price group second, the all customer rule, which is really important, and then the campaign. Okay. So if you have any questions about this, you can definitely seek out our knowledge base. We have a pretty in-depth article about this as well, so that then you can actually, work through some of these scenarios with your customers on how they may want to actually mark up their freight. So that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to go over with you today with Dynamic Ship and some of the gotchas that I've experienced with the implementing that I've done over the last few years. If you have any questions or any concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at support. We're always here to help. And thank you all for joining. And I hope you enjoyed the session.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more great content and remember to hit that bell icon to stay updated. See you in the next video.